You are standing in a crowd of thousands, and you are screaming something you would never say alone. Your throat is raw, your heart is pounding, you feel powerful. You are not yourself right now, not really, and the strange part is you know it but you don't care what is happening to you in this moment. The easy answer is that crowds bring out the worst in people. Peer pressure, mob mentality, safety in numbers. But the real answer is far stranger. Something measurable happens inside your skull the moment you are swallowed by a crowd, and it has almost nothing to do with the people standing next to you. It has to do with you disappearing. In 1895, a French scholar named Gustave Le Bon published a book that would shape crowd psychology for the next century. He had watched the mobs of the French Revolution from a distance of history, and he noticed something unsettling. Individually, the people in those mobs were teachers, shopkeepers, parents. Together, they became something else entirely. Le Bon called it a collective mind. He believed that inside a crowd, a person's individual will simply evaporates, replaced by the will of the group. He was dramatic about it. He described crowds as being capable of both heroism and savagery, often within the same hour. But he was onto something real, even if his theory was rough around the edges. Because nearly a century later, scientists would prove that crowds don't just influence behavior. They change how your brain processes your own identity. Here is the mechanism. Psychologists call it deindividuation. It is a state where your sense of personal identity gets, quite literally, absorbed into the identity of the group. Your name disappears. Your individual moral compass gets quieter. What gets louder is the group's shared emotion, whatever that emotion happens to be. Joy in a stadium, rage in a riot, grief at a vigil. And once that shift happens, the normal rules your brain uses to evaluate consequences start to bend. Think about it this way. When you are alone, every action you take is stamped with your name. If you do something cruel or brave or embarrassing, you carry that. People remember it was you. Your brain is built around this constant tracking of your own reputation. But inside a large, anonymous crowd, that tracking system gets jammed. Nobody is watching you specifically. You are one face in 10,000, and your brain, quietly, without asking your permission, loosens its grip on self-monitoring. This is not a metaphor, it is measurable. In 1976, a psychologist named Ed Diener ran one of the strangest studies in the history of social psychology, and he did it using Halloween candy. Diener and his team set up bowls of candy at houses across a neighborhood, then told trick-or-treating children to take just one piece each. Some kids arrived alone, some arrived in groups, some were asked their names before entering the house, others were left completely anonymous. The results were stark. Children in groups, and especially anonymous children in groups, were far more likely to grab handfuls of candy, break the rule entirely, or even steal money left in a nearby bowl. Alone and identified by name, kids mostly followed the rule. Anonymous and surrounded by other kids, the rule barely mattered anymore. These were children, ordinary, well-behaved children. The candy didn't change. The kids didn't change. What changed was whether they felt like an individual or a face in a crowd. Now scale that Halloween bowl up to the size of a stadium, a protest, a mosh pit, a riot. The same switch flips, just with higher stakes. There is a darker chapter to this story, and it involves a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo, who is better known for a different, more infamous experiment. But years before the Stanford prison experiment, Zimbardo ran a study on deindividuation itself. He had female college students deliver what they believed were electric shocks to another person. Half of the students wore their normal clothes and were addressed by name. The other half wore hooded lab coats that obscured their faces and were never named at all. The hooded, anonymous group delivered shocks for twice as long as the identified group. Zimbardo's conclusion echoed Le Bon's century-old idea, but now with data behind it. Strip away a person's individual identity, hide their face, remove their name, and their behavior shifts toward the extreme. Not because they are secretly cruel people, because the part of the brain responsible for self-monitoring has quietly gone offline. There's a related experiment worth knowing, one that shows how far this pull toward the group can reach even without anonymity involved. In the early 1950s, a psychologist named Solomon Asch gathered small groups of participants and asked them a laughably simple question. Which line on a card matched the length of a reference line? The answer was obvious. Anyone alone would get it right almost every single time. But Asch had planted actors in the room, and he instructed those actors to confidently give the wrong answer out loud, one after another, before the real participant answered last. Faced with a room full of confident, wrong voices, over a third of real participants abandoned the evidence in front of their own eyes and agreed with the group. Ash's line study wasn't about anonymity. Everyone could see everyone's face. It was about something even more basic, the sheer psychological gravity of a group consensus. De-individuation and conformity are cousins, not twins, but they pull on the same thread. Being part of a group quietly renegotiates what you believe is true, what you believe is acceptable, and what you believe you personally are responsible for. So why does this happen? What is actually happening inside you? Researchers now believe de-individuation works through a kind of attention shift. Normally, a portion of your cognitive attention is always pointed inward, monitoring your own behavior against your personal values. Am I being fair? Am I embarrassing myself? Would my family be proud of this? But in a crowd, your attention gets pulled outward instead, toward the group's shared emotional state. There simply isn't enough attention left over to keep monitoring yourself the way you normally would. Your brain has a limited budget for self-awareness, and a crowd spends it for you. There is a useful comparison here, one you have probably felt yourself without naming it. Think about the difference between singing in the shower and singing on a stage alone under a spotlight. Alone with no audience, you belt it out without a second thought. Alone with an audience watching only you, your self-monitoring spikes and your voice tightens. But put that same person in a stadium crowd singing the same song along with 40,000 others, and the tightness disappears again, even though there are far more witnesses than the spotlight ever had. The difference isn't how many people are watching, it's whether you feel like a singular, trackable target or one indistinguishable voice inside a wall of sound. Scientists sometimes call this the difference between public self-awareness, the sense that others are judging you specifically, and private self-awareness, the sense that your own values are watching you from the inside. A crowd doesn't just lower the first one. Research suggests it dampens the second one too, the inner voice that usually keeps your own conscience in the room. This explains something strange about crowds that has puzzled sociologists for years. Crowds are not always destructive. Sometimes they are the opposite. Think about the sudden generosity of a stadium crowd when 30,000 strangers start singing together for someone in the audience going through hardship. Think about the goosebumps of a shared moment of silence. De-individuation doesn't have a moral direction built in. It simply amplifies whatever emotional current the crowd is already carrying. Rage becomes riot. Joy becomes euphoria. Grief becomes collective mourning powerful enough to make strangers weep together. The crowd is not evil or good. The crowd is a mirror with the volume turned all the way up. There is a reason uniforms, masks, and even darkness show up again and again in situations involving crowd violence, and it is not decoration. Anonymity is the fuel. Take away someone's face, their name, their individual visibility, and you take away the psychological brakes that normally keep behavior in check. This is also why so many cultures throughout history built rituals specifically designed to trigger this state on purpose. War paint, ceremonial masks, matching uniforms. Ancient warriors didn't paint their faces just to look frightening to the enemy. They painted their faces to become anonymous to themselves, to dissolve their individual fear into the identity of the group, so they could do something as a collective that they might never have been able to do alone. Modern crowds still do this, just with different props. A sports jersey, a concert wristband, a protest sign, anything that says right now I am not only myself, I am part of something larger and its rules apply to me now instead of my own. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. This does not require a stadium. It does not require thousands of people. Researchers have found measurable de-individuation effects in groups as small as 4 or 5 people, especially when anonymity is involved. Online, behind a username instead of a face, the exact same psychological mechanism switches on. Comment sections, group chats, anonymous forums. The crowd doesn't need bodies pressed together anymore. It just needs enough distance from your name. This is why the internet can turn ordinarily gentle people into something almost unrecognizable, and why that same person sitting across from you at dinner would never say those words out loud. It is not that the internet reveals who people really are. It is that the internet removes the exact psychological mechanism that normally keeps them in check, the same mechanism Diener measured with candy bowls, the same one Zimbardo measured with hooded lab coats, the same one Le Bon wrote about while watching revolutionaries in the street. Consider how deliberately this gets built into online spaces. A username instead of a face, a default avatar instead of a photograph, a reply button that lets you speak into a crowd of thousands without ever standing in a room with a single one of them. Every one of these design choices, whether anyone intended it this way or not, recreates the exact conditions Zimbardo built with a hood and a lab coat. Distance from your name, distance from your face, distance from the people who would otherwise hold you accountable for what you say. The crowd used to require a physical location, a street, a stadium, a square. Now it only requires a shared feed and enough strangers scrolling through it at the same time. And just like the stadium, the online crowd is not inherently destructive. The same mechanism that fuels pylons and cruelty also fuels enormous waves of collective generosity. Strangers coordinating disaster relief overnight, funding a stranger's medical bill within hours, rallying around a cause none of them would have championed alone. The mechanism itself is neutral. It only ever amplifies whatever emotional current it is handed. So the next time you feel yourself swept up in something bigger than you, a crowd's roar, a comment thread, a chanting stadium, pay attention to that specific feeling. The one where your name seems to matter less. The one where the usual weight of consequence feels lighter than it should. That feeling is not you finding your true self in the group. That is you quietly and measurably disappearing into it. You are standing in a crowd of thousands and you are screaming something you would never say alone. Now you know why.